The air inside the Al-Ma'asim tunnel felt thick long before anyone realized it was failing. Along the concrete throat between Mina and Mecca, the heat moved like a living thing, pressing sweat through cotton robes and fogging eyeglasses. Green signal lights glowed at the ceiling. Fans droned, loudspeakers crackled with instructions in many tongues. Pilgrims walked shoulder to shoulder, whispering prayers, sandals shuffling on wet pavement. Up ahead, the flow slowed, then bunched. A man set down a suitcase and bent to tie a sandal. Someone tugged a child to the side. The tunnel swallowed the sounds and gave them back louder, the way tunnels do. Then the fans choked, coughed air that went nowhere, and the lights dimmed to the color of old limes. It was July 2nd, 1990, the day of the stoning ritual at the Jamarat, when the Hajj presses the greatest number of people into the smallest spaces. The new pedestrian tunnel had been built to ease the walk between the tent city of Mina and the bridge where pilgrims throw pebbles at the three pillars, a ceremony meant to mark defiance of temptation. Engineers had calculated throughput and installed ventilation, signs, and lighting. Trucks and buses were supposed to halt outside, leaving the tunnel to walkers only. All of it worked on paper. On the ground that day, the heat climbed past 40 degrees Celsius. The crowds arrived from every direction at once, and the design margins that looked generous at a drafting table collapsed under the weight of a million moving choices. Inside the tunnel, the pause turned into a jam. People arriving from the Mina side kept entering, assuming the slow patch would clear as it always did. Others, already inside, met a wall of bodies and tried to push past. The tunnel's slight slope worked like a funnel. Those who pushed from behind could not see what blocked the front. Without fresh air, the temperature rose quickly. Humidity hit the ceiling. Carbon dioxide pooled low. Breaths shortened. Voices changed from prayer to instruction to plea. The loudspeakers said to keep moving. The fans stuttered and fell still. Crowd behavior is simple until it isn't. The difference between a crowd and a crush is measured in centimeters, not meters. People pressed chest to back, hips to hips, arms pinned. Some reached for the cable tray along the wall and hauled themselves onto it to make room. Others tried to climb the service curb, only to find it slick. A pilgrim fainted in the center lane and could not fall. His body stayed upright until those around him started to tilt. Someone screamed. Someone else said Allah's name and slipped as sandals lost their purchase on a slurry of water, sweat, and dropped cups. The tunnel filled with a sound like the sea, a hiss made of thousands of strained throats. Police at the entrances waved batons and shouted for order, trying to reverse the flow. But direction means nothing when people cannot turn their shoulders. Two human streams met head-on at a point where one narrow lane had been partially blocked earlier by a stalled cart. That small reduction and the stoppage at the front did the rest. Pressure grew until ribs could not fill. Hands that reached for help found only more hands. The green ceiling lamps turned the perspiration on faces a waxy color. Somewhere, a generator tripped. The lights dipped again. A wedge formed as a few men who still had space tried to push back toward daylight. For a long time it was not a stampede, no running, no wild flight, just a crowd turned into a vice. The deadliest mechanism was not trampling, but the quiet, mechanical theft of air. People suffocated standing up, locked in place by the weight of those behind them. Those who fell created holes the size of one body, into which the next bodies collapsed, until the floor formed pits of interlocked limbs impossible to pull apart. On the Mina side, ambulances tried to nose forward and could not. On the Mecca side, a police truck bumped into a wall of white cloth and stopped. Time stretched in the heat. Minutes became an hour. The fans did not return. When fresh air finally reached the center, after officers forced the upstream entrances closed and rescue teams clawed a path down the walls. The scene had shifted from confusion to recovery. Many lay where they had dropped, faces ashen, mouths parted. Medics moved person to person, checking for pulse, for breath, for any sign. Some revived with oxygen and water, gulping air like divers breaking the surface. Others did not. Volunteers formed human chains to pass the living out toward the cooler light, then formed new chains for the dead. Under the open sun, the heat felt clean compared with the tunnel's sour breath. The numbers were hard even for officials to accept. More than 1,400 pilgrims, most of them from South and Southeast Asia and North Africa, never returned to their tents. Identification took days. Some families learned the news from embassy lists taped to consulate gates. Others learned only that their kin were missing and would remain missing, the paperwork taking years to catch up with loss. In the tent city, morning routines continued out of habit. Tea, washing, the careful folding of cloth, because what else could the living do while the counting went on? The inquiry focused on the parts of the system that failed under foreseeable load. The tunnel's capacity had been rated for a maximum flow in one direction at a time, but people had entered from both ends, compressing the center. The ventilation plan assumed open space around each person and steady air exchange. Once densities rose above design, the fans could not strip heat fast enough. A stalled cart and later a bus reported nearer than it should have been added friction at critical points. Signage and language added smaller frictions, commands not heard or not understood on first telling. Police on site did what training allowed, but lacked the tools and authority to flip the tunnel to one way before the pressure built. None of that helped the families in the days that followed. Refrigerated trucks became temporary morgues. Religious leaders offered guidance on burial rites when bodies could not be returned quickly. Survivors recited what they had seen with a plainness that gave the facts their full weight. The smell, the wet concrete, the way the sound inside your chest changed when you had to breathe too fast, too close to too many others. A man described trying to press his palm against the tunnel wall just to prove he still had a body that could touch something larger than himself. In the months and years that followed, the rituals stayed, but the infrastructure changed. Saudi authorities widened the Jamarat area, rebuilt the bridge, separated the stoning pillars, and added multiple levels to distribute the load. They installed new ventilation schemes sized for crush densities, added sensors and cameras, and shifted traffic plans to enforce one-way flows at peak times. Schedules were staggered by nationality and group permits. Buses were pushed farther back. Security training emphasized flow management instead of static perimeter control. Crowd science specialists began to treat the Hajj like the world's largest recurring mass movement problem and not merely a security event. The work refined with each season because the stakes returned every year. Even with reforms, the memory of the tunnel remained. People who survived found the sound of a stalled escalator could start their heart racing. A crowded elevator, a stuck subway car, any failure of moving air, these became private proxies for August heat in a concrete tube. In sermons and family stories, the loss acquired a quiet shape. A reminder that carelessness in design and planning kills as surely as malice, and that systems must be built for the way people truly move, not the way pamphlets say they should. At the holy sites, every new ramp and barrier carries the imprint of those lessons. You can see it in the widened approaches and the marshaled queues and the loudspeakers that now repeat the same sentence in many languages long before anyone reaches a choke point. You can hear it in the clipped radio codes and the way officers glance first, not at faces, but at the density in front of them and the exits behind. The goal is not to keep people apart. The Hajj is togetherness by design, but to keep their togetherness below the threshold where bodies turn into wedges and air turns into a currency too expensive to spare. What happened in 1990 began as ordinary congestion on a hot day. It became catastrophe when small compromises stacked. A cart in the wrong spot, a bus too near, air that could not be refreshed, supervisors without the authority to reverse a stream, and the assumption that tomorrow would be like yesterday because yesterday had also been crowded and somehow had ended well. It ended with names that fill lists long enough to look like census pages, and with families who still speak of a father's last pilgrimage as both fulfillment and loss. Systems fail when the parts that keep people safe are treated as afterthoughts: ventilation, signs, languages, the blunt geometry of where a crowd is allowed to turn. In Mecca, the repairs did not erase the tunnel's story. They made the story permanent, written in concrete widths and one-way arrows and fans that move more air than most people will ever notice. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.